October the 8th, 1515, Margaret Douglas entered a world steeped in chaos and dysfunction. Her mother, Margaret Tudor, widow of James IV of Scotland and sister to Henry VIII, fled a hostile Scotland after a disastrous rebound marriage to Archibald Douglas, a scheming nobleman. Meanwhile, Archibald was too busy plotting in Scotland to properly care for his wife and newborn. Their toxic union made Margaret a pawn in their vendettas. Margaret's early life was a battleground, literally. At just 2, her father snatched her from her mother's arms and whisked her off to Scotland, securing custody through sheer force. With Archibald off and away losing battles, young Margaret was left under the guardianship of Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's ill-fated advisor. Wolsey's infamous downfall during the Anne Boleyn saga meant Margaret was no stranger to turmoil, so her early years were a whirlwind of political scheming, divided loyalties, and personal betrayals. Yet Margaret's resilience shone through. Surrounded by chaos and raised by a series of questionable men, it's a testament to her strength that she not only survived, but also rose to prominence in the Tudor court. By 15, Margaret Douglas was already making waves. Clever, poised, and reportedly beautiful, she had caught the attention of her uncle, Henry VIII, who was growing increasingly anxious about his lack of a male heir. As a potential successor, third in line then, Margaret was summoned to London to live near the royal court. She became part of her cousin Mary's household, where the two quickly developed a deep connection that would endure through all the twists and turns of their tumultuous lives. Their closeness deepened when Mary was declared illegitimate after Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. This twist elevated Margaret in the line of succession and brought her closer to the throne. With her newfound prominence came both perks and strings. Margaret was adorned with fine clothes, servants, and a high-profile position as one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting. However, her marriage became a matter of state, not sentiment, in Henry's eyes. Margaret, however, had other plans. She had fallen deeply in love with Thomas Howard, Anne Boleyn's dashing young uncle, just 4 years her senior. Their romance, though passionate, was also perilous. Engaged in secret, they risked everything for love in a time when personal choice in marriage was a rare luxury. The stakes grew higher when Anne Boleyn fell from favour and lost her head. The Boleyn family's influence crumbled, and with it, Thomas's standing. When Henry discovered the engagement, his wrath was swift and merciless. Both Margaret and Thomas were thrown into the Tower of London. Thomas was charged with secretly betrothing the king's niece without permission, while Margaret, though not officially arrested, was still imprisoned. Margaret broke off her engagement under mounting pressure, and with little hope for their future. Tragically, their separation came too late. Thomas fell ill in what was likely an infectious disease and died in the Tower. Heartbroken, Margaret also became gravely ill. Her mother, Margaret Tudor, appealed to Henry, begging for her daughter's release to recover. And perhaps softened by Thomas's death or recognising Margaret's value as a potential heir, Henry relented. Margaret was freed, but sent to a nunnery to heal. Her romantic rebellion was crushed, but her resilience was intact. Margaret was nothing if not resilient. After recovering from her heartbreak and illness, Henry VIII released her from imprisonment. Still, in true Henry fashion, there was a catch. Worried her claim to the throne might overshadow his son Edward's, he declared Margaret illegitimate, sidelining her politically. Still, she remained a glittering figure at court, serving as lady-in-waiting to his latest queen, Anne of Cleves, even earning the honour of welcoming Anne to England. Amid the chaos of Henry's marital dramas, Margaret kept her focus on survival and influence. When Anne of Cleves' marriage ended in disaster, Henry married Catherine Howard, a relative of Margaret's late fiancé, Thomas Howard. Surrounded by the Howard clan, Margaret was drawn to another family member, Sir Charles Howard, Catherine's brother. Despite her tarnished status, Margaret fell for Charles, a high-ranking courtier, but unfortunately, history repeated itself. When Henry discovered their romance, he was furious again. Margaret's crime? Falling in love without his approval. For the second time in her young life, Margaret found herself back in the Tower of London, a reminder that even her sharp mind and unyielding ambition couldn't save her from the trouble that always seemed to follow her heart, especially when it came to those irresistible Howard boys. By this point, Margaret Douglas had perfected the art of bouncing back. Though her second stint in the Tower tested even Henry VIII's patience, her father, Archibald Douglas, wielded his influence in Scotland to secure her release. With Henry keen on maintaining good relations with Scotland, Margaret was freed and restored to prominence. She became a high-ranking lady-in-waiting to Catherine Parr, Henry VI's and final wife, a role she excelled in thanks to a long-standing friendship with Catherine. And Margaret was among the few honoured to attend their intimate wedding, a sign of her renewed importance. As a Tudor woman, Margaret Douglas was not exempt from the marriage market. At 29, she found herself in a strategic marriage with Matthew Stewart, a politically savvy Scottish noble. Matthew, with his eyes on Margaret's royal connections, promised Henry troops and support in the ongoing Anglo-Scottish conflict to sweeten the deal. Margaret, always the pragmatist, saw this as an opportunity to escape her cycle of imprisonment and secure a powerful ally. Surprisingly, the match worked. While romantic love may not have been in the cards, Margaret and Matthew shared an unshakable ambition. Together they schemed their way into becoming a Tudor-era power couple, their union solidified by the birth of their son Henry, better known to history as Lord Darnley. Their partnership set the stage for even bigger ambitions, as both saw themselves as potential rulers of England or Scotland, or maybe both, and now Margaret's determination was a force to be reckoned with. Margaret Douglas knew how to play the long game, but patience wasn't her strong suit. While Henry VIII delighted in her marriage to Matthew Stewart, hinting that her descendants could inherit the throne if his children died childless, Margaret wasn't content to wait. She and Matthew, both staunch Catholics, immediately began leveraging England's religious divide. When Henry gifted them a countryside palace as a wedding present, Margaret turned it into a hub for Catholic conspirators plotting to restore the faith to the English throne. Her strategic thinking was a key factor in her political acumen. Predictably furious, Henry excluded Margaret and her children from the line of succession, this time permanently, and died in 1547, leaving no chance for reconciliation. Things went from bad to worse when Margaret's ever-toxic father, Archibald, disinherited her out of spite for Matthew. Stripped of her claim to her family's Scottish lands, Margaret suddenly faced financial difficulties. In 1550, she travelled to Scotland to visit Marie de Guise, widow of James V and regent for her daughter, Mary, Queen of Scots. It must have been cathartic for these two formidable women, both sidelined by arrogant men, to commiserate over wine and their shared frustration. Despite her setbacks, Margaret wasn't done scheming. She gave birth to another son, Charles, in 1555, and waited for the political tides to shift. Her patience paid off when Edward VI died in 1553 and her childhood friend Mary I ascended the throne. A devout Catholic like Margaret, Queen Mary welcomed her back to court, restoring her to prominence. Margaret thrived, surrounded by old friends and new opportunities. With Mary childless and Elizabeth's legitimacy still in question, Margaret suddenly looked like the best candidate to inherit the throne. Her long-held dream of ruling might finally come true. Margaret Douglas's life took another dramatic twist after Mary I's death in 1558. Named chief mourner at her cousin's funeral, Margaret was honoured, but not as she had hoped. With Protestant Elizabeth I now on the throne, Margaret retreated to her countryside estate, where she resumed hosting Catholic dissidents plotting to unseat the new queen. Elizabeth, fully aware of Margaret's machinations, sent spies to monitor her activities and those of Matthew, who was stirring up his trouble in Scotland. When evidence of their scheming reached Elizabeth, she threw Matthew into the Tower and placed Margaret under house arrest. During this time, Margaret shifted her ambitions from claiming the throne herself to positioning her children for power. Her focus turned to her son Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, and his potential marriage to Mary, Queen of Scots. A union between Darnley and Mary would unite two powerful claims to the thrones of Scotland and England, creating a Catholic dynasty and making Margaret the influential mother of a king. After much intrigue and Elizabeth's futile attempts to stall by hinting at her marriage prospects, Darnley and Mary wed in 1565. Predictably, Elizabeth retaliated by sending Margaret back to the Tower, likely to her by now familiar suite. But Margaret's triumph was short-lived. In 1567, Darnley was assassinated in an explosive scandal that implicated Mary, Queen of Scots. Furious and believing Mary guilty, Margaret abandoned her alliance with her and aligned herself with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, recognizing Margaret's usefulness, released her from the Tower, and the two joined forces against Mary, who was now on the run and accused of murder. When Mary surrendered, Margaret's grandson James VI became baby King of Scotland. Too young to rule, James needed a regent, and Margaret successfully manoeuvred Matthew into that role. Though she never wore a crown herself, Margaret's relentless plotting ensured her grandson held one, finally securing her place in the power dynamics of the British Isles. After Matthew died in a Scottish uprising, Margaret Douglas re-evaluated Mary, Queen of Scots' role in Darnley's murder. Sharp as ever, Margaret began piecing together evidence suggesting Mary had been framed. Quietly shifting her loyalties, she subtly urged Elizabeth I to reconsider Mary's guilt, while secretly supporting her daughter-in-law. On her way to visit her grandson, James, the baby King of Scotland, Margaret stopped at the home of Bess of Hardwick, where Mary was staying. During this detour, Margaret's son Charles fell in love with Bess's daughter, Elizabeth Cavendish. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a marriage, a union Margaret had deftly orchestrated to strengthen her political alliances. When Elizabeth I learned of the unapproved marriage, she predictably flew into a rage and once again sent Margaret to the Tower. Yet even Elizabeth couldn't stay angry for long, and Margaret was soon released. The union proved fruitful, producing a daughter, Arbella Stuart, whose future held extraordinary potential. Tragically, Charles died shortly after Arbella's birth, leaving Elizabeth Cavendish and Arbella to move in with Margaret. The three women likely spent their days plotting how to secure Arbella's claim to the thrones of England and Scotland. Margaret's financial situation, worsened by her father's disinheritance, never recovered. She died in poverty 2 years later, but received a grand burial in Westminster Abbey, fitting for a woman of her lineage. Laid to rest alongside her son Charles, Margaret Douglas's legacy endured in her descendants, cementing her place in the intricate web of Tudor and Stuart politics. If you enjoyed this latest video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Click on the screen now to explore the untold stories and hidden secrets of another fascinating figure with a story to tell. Get ready to uncover more historical gems and intriguing royal tales. Your next adventure in history starts right here.